Hey folks, Steve here with another Special Access Empires Ultimate Edition video for you today. This is going to be part two of our Dice of Decision campaign, which will include Schiffskrieg. This is going to be the video that covers chapter two of the Dice of Decision setup. So in the first part of the first video, we dealt with the immediate aftermath of World War One. Now we're going to do sort of the next, batch of time that will eventually lead up to the 1937 start date with a very different campaign on our hands at that point. Now, uh, let's talk very briefly a recap of the previous activities. We have seen a great number of changes. So we went with a Central Powers victory in World War One. I chose that. I didn't roll for it. I want to see just how far we can bend things around and play a very different game, just to see the full potential of the system. I'm using the narrative from a PC game mod called Kaiserreich. That's the name of the mod. It is a mod for the PC games Hearts of Iron 4 and Darkest Hour, which is a sort of like super version of Hearts of Iron 2. Out of those, I prefer Darkest Hour at the moment, so that's kind of my frame of reference. And it follows a very different sort of history. Germany wins World War One, and a great number of things occur. And generally, a new World War Two occurs where a imperial Germany, or at least a constitutional monarchy Germany, fends off against a chaotic world that includes communist Britain, communist France, and a whole lot of other craziness going on. So we're kind of using that as a guiding narrative, and we have finished up that first World War One part. As it stands, and keep in mind that the factions across these games are going to continue to still be the Western powers, the Axis, and the Soviets, even if the Soviet faction is actually a constitutional monarchy or a democracy in Russia, that sort of thing. They're still the primary faction. So you're not going to see something so crazy divergent like Germany and America teaming up. That's not going to happen because Germany and Japan will always be considered Axis powers, and the Americans will always be some part of the Western powers. So there are certain restrictions in terms of what can change, but those are kind of some really broad notes. So, in the immediate aftermath of World War One, we have seen Russia really collapse. They've gone into the Russian Civil War. The government in Moscow is a communist one, but they have lost a lot of territory. The Baltic states are free. Poland is free. Belarusia is free. Ukraine is free. The Caucasus is free and independent. And so much of the Western territories of what was once the Russian Empire have become independent nations. In the Far East, there is a Far Eastern Republic. So again, heavily weak in Russia at the moment, but that doesn't mean we won't see things continue to shift here in Chapter 2. We have also seen Germany retain its German Pacific Empire due to its victory and basically a status quo maintained with Japan. Germany controls all of its island holdings, and that includes Rabaul and parts of New Guinea, which could be a pretty important factor as we get towards World War II. There's a potential for Germany to sell all of its Pacific holdings to Japan, which will actually give Japan potentially a little bit of a leg up, a head start in Pacific expansion. So that could be really important. Now, Austria Hungary still exists and controls, a good chunk of territory here, which makes it a very interesting minor country. However, it's not immediately aligned with any of the factions, and so it could be quite a prize to pick up from a diplomatic standpoint. They do control one, two, three strategic hexes that are really Axis hexes. So Germany certainly has an interest in either aligning or taking over Austria Hungary. Also, big change up is the Ottoman Empire still exists and controls much of the Middle East, including Egypt. And so they've gotten some spoils out of the war. Italy, which had joined the Entente in World War One, has been defeated, and a lot of shakeup has occurred. Libya is an independent minor country, having won its independence from Italy in its revolution, and Italy sits as a communist state at the moment with pro Soviet influence. In the Pacific, not a whole lot has really changed other than that German Pacific Empire. So I'm not going to show the Pacific map for the moment, but those are some pretty big shakeup and some big changes. Now, from a Axis perspective in Europe, anyway, Germany certainly has some incentive, if nothing else changes much here, to try to get the Central Powers band back together again. If they were able to diplomatically influence Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire into joining the Axis cause, they would actually gain, a pretty good board position just in terms of strategic hexes. And depending on how badly the Allies are doing in terms of their own situation, we would see Germany in a really strong position, especially because they could then pick on these other minor countries at their leisure or influence them diplomatically with a Russia that starts much further east in terms of a border than in the standard game. So even right now, as we start looking at strategic considerations, the German player is certainly looking at the board and going, okay, well, I would love to diplomatically influence Austria, Hungary, and Turkey. That would be really beneficial. Let's bring the band back together again. We've got to deal with some communists south of us. We've got a lot of these Eastern European countries that could be put under our sway. Historically, we had dealt the historical narrative is Germany eventually picks up Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary as allies, invades Yugoslavia. Well, already it's a very different political situation. We just have one big state here, at least for the time being, and then we've still got these minor countries about. Lots of different positioning, different things to consider. And already the North African theater is going to be very different. Again, Libya is a minor country. Egypt is in control is under the control of the Ottoman Empire. So very, very different game state already. But again, there's a lot of chaos that we're going to play through here yet to come. So this next segment or this next chapter, which is called Chapter 2 in terms of the Dice of the Decision, is taking us from 1933 basically through 1936. And much like Chapter 1, there's a few early die rolls that will influence the general trajectory. So those early die rolls in Chapter 1 were around the opening moves of World War One, and that eventually gives you, like, what sort of World War One victory did we get? Who won and by how much? That gives you kind of one of six checklist paths to work your way through. Well, chapter 2 works the same way. So we're going to have a couple of die rolls, and then we're going to get one of six general situations, and within that will be a checklist of different die rolls and things that will occur. And I think I'm going to put my thumb on the scales, just like I did in chapter 1, and kind of guide it down a certain path, because I'd like to see what kind of crazy results we could potentially get. So we're going to do that next. So hopefully that was a good overview of kind of where we're at. The history is progressing as we march forward. And yeah, let's see what else occurs here. So for chapter 2, the big result is going to be what the general um, climate is, politically speaking. And so the results for this range from general insurrection, which is kind of the most chaotic result, versus it could be instability, which is not quite as bad, but still a lot of friction, agitation, which is getting a little bit lighter and lighter. And then it gets to the more orderly results like erratic electorates, which just kind of shift things, but not to extreme degrees, stability, and then peace and prosperity. So what is the ultimate flavor of the world in this aftermath? What we've seen happen at the end of World War One, and there are basically two tables that we need to roll on that will influence the between the wars outcome table. So those results that I mentioned is on the range of 1 to 6 on that die roll. So you can imagine there would be some die roll modifiers here. Um, I do want to choose the ultimate outcome, but because there are some tables that we may need to roll on in the tables leading up to the final conclusion there, I'm still going to need to like pick or roll a decision. But again, so the general insurrection, I think, is the most appropriate for the Kaiserreich narrative that we're trying to stick with, because that's going to lead to some upheaval both in Great Britain and France, which is kind of what I want to get, just to mix the game up quite a bit. So that's going to be a new dark age descends upon Europe, general insurrection. And honestly, I think, let's get real here for a second. If World War One had been won by the Central Powers, I mean, you could maybe try to, I don't know who's going to argue that it would have been an era of peace and prosperity in the aftermath of that, right? I don't know that that had been the case, because you still have, in history, right, the Central Powers lost, but we saw really the collapse of several sort of, autocratic type of structures in terms of empires, the Ottoman Empire collapsing, the German Empire collapsing, Austria Hungary collapsing, Russia collapsing, and not, no matter how you want to look at it, a very different kind of government structure in those countries afterwards as they continue to mutate over the years. And so, um, to me, I mean, if you have, and already we're seeing it on the table, right? We have the socialist revolutions, the communist revolutions in Russia and Italy now in this narrative. It would have to be, I think, in an era where the central powers have won. The turmoil, the clash of the political divide, the ideologies that are springing up during this time period, they wouldn't have simply disappeared just because a monarchical regime is at the head of Europe. I think you would still have these things, and it might be harder because now you don't have the sort of entente powers shepherding, the change of democratic systems. Here we see what is probably a very difficult transition period in countries that are dealing with the fallout of losing this war, not having much to gain from it, and really countries like France and Britain, losing territory functionally in the aftermath. And so I think we want to kind of glom onto that and leverage that in the outcomes here. So I'm gonna say, again, the between wars outcome table is going to be general insurrection. I'm just going to show this really quick. So that's the between wars outcome, and you can see there. But the order here is actually to do the 1920s political climate and then the 30s economic climate, which again has its own results, but then will influence the die roll, either potentially giving a -1, meaning more likely to be this general insurrection that I want it to be, or adding a +1, which would make it hard. So we kind of need to avoid um, the +1 die roll modifiers. So in the 1920s political climate, that means that if we had the U.S. join and strengthen the League of Nations, which would be a roll of a 6, that would add a +1. That would avoid general insurrection. So the backing of the U.S. keeps things from falling totally apart. Well, we're not going to do that. And it is interesting, the pulleys and levers, that the different results do influence other tables over time, which I think is really neat in this system. It's a really cool aspect of it. Um, so if I look at the 1920s climate, so again, with the sixth result being the U.S. strengthening the League of Nations, we're not going to do that. The one result, the complete opposite, would be that Germany refused admittance to the Locarno discussions, and we would roll on independence movement and get a -1, so more likely to get a general insurrection. Um, I don't know. Some of those could be extreme, and if I look at the independence movement tables, what we could see is um, Austro-Hungarian loss, Spanish loss, French loss, which would be North African nationalism, which I think is actually pretty interesting. Russian loss, so further Russian losses, um, more Turkish loss, British loss, lots of different things. If we went with that, we could just say the League of Nations maintains international peace and get no result, or we just do, uh, or we don't do the modifier. We say nationalist movements take hold, and we roll on that independent movement table. Now, does the game get more interesting if we did independence movements? Well, we could see Austria-Hungary chipped at. We could see Spain chipped at. We could see France chipped at, and it would be really interesting to see Morocco or Algeria or Tunisia become independent. So that would actually be kind of interesting to see in the aftermath of World War One. I think that's feasible. Or we could see Yeah, it's a very interesting one if we decide to let that happen. I think that's worthwhile looking at. So we'll say in the 1920s political climate, um, we'll say America declines to expand the Kellogg-Briand discussions. We'll have a -1 to the overall outcome, but we already know what our overall outcome is going to be. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's not the right result. My goodness, guys. Let's go ahead and say that nationalist movements take hold. Let's do that. I think that's a good one. I think that's one where it's like we're going to get some mixture of stuff, and we'll roll the die to see what we get. Okay, and so we get Russia loss, Russian rabble rousing, um, and I think the next one on the list is going to be like Siberia. Russia can't really lose much more, so let me go figure that out, and then we'll talk about the 1930s economic climate. Okay, so in the options, with my proxy player situation so goofy, and I'm not keeping track of it, I just rolled the die to decide which faction would decide uh, the Russian loss selection, and I rolled Axis, and they chose indeed Siberia. Now this is where I'm kind of like, oh man, now this is looking real bad for Russia, like real bad for Russia. I think it's a question now of how quickly can Russia reclaim territory like Siberia, or let's say Japan is attacking the Far East Republic. Does I mean they have their own force pool, so the Japanese might get bogged down trying to fight these minor countries. It's not just like those minor countries are going to fall into nothingness, but they're going to have a hard time keeping their production up. So there's a lot of weirdness here. I don't know how bad it really is, but losing Siberia is yet another loss for Russia. Um, Makes it really tough. Like Russia is really starting to lose a lot of its oomph from some perspective. But again, with the production system, the way it works in this game, it's not that bad. It's not as though suddenly we're not going to get a bunch of units. It could simply mean we lose access to some stuff. So we'll figure that out along the way. But if we return back to the 1930s economic climate, now we've got uh, the the decision. So one extreme is that the Great Depression racks Germany particularly hard, in which case we reduce German leadership. Now, what this would do is it would make our imperial Germany, um, a, I think, a constitutional Kaiser. So that's something we need to keep in mind. So our leadership gets quote unquote reduced, but that just shifts our government. Um, or it's the Great Depression leads to widespread unrest. So that would be, I mean, it just affects more likelihood for general insurrection, which is what we want, but it doesn't affect the German leadership, which, honestly, we're likely to see some leadership change anyway. Um, so there's that, I guess. Um, or we could see recession and recovery cycles, which is going to lead to a roll on the naval arms race. So would the next result, but a slightly different modifier. And then finally, steady economic growth helps Germany repay its war debts. And we would increase German leadership and have a +1 die roll on the naval arms race, which is going to kind of lead, the more bonuses we have to that basically means larger naval race results for everyone, which could be very interesting. But again, this would potentially influence the outcome table. So I think I might actually need to go take a step and look at Kaiserreich and go look at what was the result. If I recall correctly, in that fictional alt history narrative, Germany is hit with Great Depression, but so is everybody. So I'm not sure I actually want to reduce German leadership here because I'm expecting more German leadership changes, and I do kind of want to end up Germany having a constitutional monarchy because that's I think what it is in Kaiserreich. So let me go do a quick reference, and we'll make our decision based on that and proceed from there. Okay, just to shortcut things, I'm just going to go with the 2 to 3 result, the greatest number result that could come up, which is the Great Depression leads to widespread unrest. So we just make it more likely that we will have gotten our general insurrection result, which is what we did want, and nothing else makes it kind of easier for us to reach. So again, if we put all of this together in terms of what we have, that's going to push us into general insurrection, which is going to come with it a whole string of things. I mean, not to spoil too much or to show too much, but this is a general set of things that are going to occur. So we are going to see the German leadership, in the midst of all this upheaval, we are going to see uh, some German reforms in the government. That's going to have to occur. If we had ended up with a different, more prosperous or peaceful end result, we would see a greater chance that the governments wouldn't necessarily change on here. And so we would be maybe rolling on the German government table and maybe stay imperial Germany, but then also get some other things tacked on top of that. Here, we're guaranteed to suffer a reduced German leadership result, which will change the actual government form. So we will, I believe, it's going to drop us down to a constitutional monarchy, which isn't very different, but I think that is in alignment with what we want to see. So a softening of the imperial Germany regime. But we got to start with step one. So with that, we are going to roll with a -1 DRM each time on the gain and losses table for the following countries. So we need to do this gain and losses table several times. We're going to do this for Austria-Hungary. We're going to do this for Britain, France, Germany, Russia, Spain, Turkey, and Ukraine with a -1, which means that it is it is a 50% chance that that country is going to lose something. Now, this is going to be kind of a sequential task. I don't want to show this all on camera because it's going to take a while. So I'm going to take a cut here. I'm going to go through, I'm going to do the gain and losses table. It is possible, by the way, even with a -1, if I roll a 6, that the country could gain something. So when we talk about gain and losses, the normal table result is if you roll a 1 to 2, darkness gathers, you would apply country loss, the proxy faction would apply a loss. If it's a 3 to 4, it's a status quo, so no result. And a 5 to 6 is the sun never sets, proxy faction applies, that country gains something. But again, with a -1, it makes it more likely of a loss. The possibility of a gain is still there, however unlikely. And we're going to do this again for all these major powers and some of these secondary powers that are on the board currently. So let me go take care of that, and when we come back, we'll talk about the result for each country, and then we're going to move on to step 2, which is going to be about reducing Russian leadership. Well, the luck of the dice have certainly gone, I mean, I guess the Axis's way. We're not even really sure that some of these countries are going to be Axis at the end of the day. But as it stands right now, Austria-Hungary managed to avoid a loss. Britain got a loss, but I kind of had it as the Western Allied gets the pick as the proxy player. And the easiest thing for Britain to lose was Northern Ireland to Ireland. I couldn't quite see a true negative for taking that hit. And so there is now a seeded landmarker for Ireland getting Northern Ireland. That's going to bother somebody somewhere in the world, but so it goes. And that was the easiest. I would have rather have lost as the Western powers, Northern Ireland than say some other location on the map. I mean, it just, in relatively inconsequential. The thing that could come back to bite me, I guess, is if Ireland were to be pulled into the Axis sphere, then maybe, we're given the Axis a port nearby to Britain. But that felt like, we weren't losing a whole lot. I don't want to lose Malta, and I don't want to lose many other locations on the map. So in terms of just strategic loss, giving up something to a neutral, that felt doable. France lost Tunisia, which is now an independent country. So more I guess freedom for North Africa, at least for some of the areas. Germany didn't lose anything. Russia, we gave um, uh, we made Kazakhstan independent. So That's a map overlay in the Pacific region. I guess I can show that pretty simply. It's going to be a little hard to see from this angle, but there is a map overlay up there for Kazakhstan, which gets its own border and its flag up there. So Kazakhstan, Spain lost Basque. So Basque is a minor country now in Spain. Not a huge deal. That was one where the Axis was the proxy player and got to pick. Um, or I'm sorry, not the Axis, the Soviets, the Russians. And, Spain losing something, there's only so much to lose. And so we just made it Basque. Um, and then Ukraine didn't lose anything. So generally, a kind of nice result, a set of results. Nobody gained anything, so nobody got a six. It might have been interesting to see somebody gain something out of that. Maybe what can Spain gain? I don't know. Um, Maybe they gain Gibraltar. That'd be interesting, but that didn't happen. Um, so that's it for step one of general insurrection. Step two is to reduce Russian leadership. And I took a look at the book. Communist Russia is the lowest form, I guess, in terms of high to low. So reducing Russian leadership doesn't actually change anything. Russia, the core parts of Russia, remains communist. Now, in the Kaiserreich narrative, amusingly, after all is said and done and Russia loses a bunch of stuff, Russia actually gets Kerensky back in power and they form what is functionally a parliamentary democracy kind of thing. But in the mod, as you play it, Russia can be thrown into further chaos. So I don't know. There was really no way with general insurrection for Russia to become a democracy at this point. I don't think the tables are allow for that versus other interactions that I do want to occur. So again, my thumb is on the scales as I choose, but for now that'll work. So now the next thing we need to do is step three, which is rolling with a -1 DRM on the current Russian leadership table. So there are different tables in your fold-out bit for 23 to 36, and there is a Russian leadership. So we are the Communist Russia table 2.7 for this, and we're going to roll with a -1. Now the results, because it's a -1, it's impossible to get the last result, which is really the one that would be narratively in alignment with Kaiserreich, which is communist leaders turn moderate, and you apply constitutional czar and a Russia loss, another Russia loss, my gosh. But we can't get that result at all. So the general insurrection is going to keep the communists in power in Russia no matter what we roll. But we basically have an increased chance of getting, because of the -1, the one result, which is industrial disruptions threaten Russia's readiness for war, and we would apply unprepared Russia, which it's been a while since I've read what unprepared does. Basically, it just makes you worse off at the beginning of the game for your force pool and capability. So Russia doesn't want that to be what we roll, but we will roll the die for this one because I just don't know what we're going to get. And I rolled a 2, -1 is a 1, so it is, in fact, unprepared Russia, which this is going to kind of throw the game. Russia is just falling apart in many ways, and I don't exactly know how we're going to get out of that in game. So 6047 is unprepared. 6047. If the prepared Russia marker is in the TK Soviet Russia emergency mobilization box, remove it from play. Otherwise, place the unprepared Russia marker in the Russian emergency mobilization conditional events box. Okay. So when the emergency mobilization conditional event is triggered, place only the unprepared Russia marker in the delay box, and when it comes off the turn track, then you place the Russian emergency mobilization counters. This could actually be a pretty big deal. So I'll be able to find the marker pretty easily here. But the net effect is going to be that whenever Russia comes to war, whenever they join the main war effort, rather than getting their emergency units quickly, or on the same cadence they would normally expect to. Instead, there's going to be a potentially big delay on that. So this is yeah, if this was going to be an opposed game, I'd be throwing up the table right now saying, "Hey, Russia is so hobbled right now. Is there any point in playing?" But because I don't care and I'm just willing to see what happens, we're going to keep going. But this is definitely one of those situations where, like, man, Russia is in such rough shape. It's hard to understand how they're going to be very effective after this. Um, So let me get this marker down, and then we're going to apply reduce German leadership, which is going to bump them out of Imperial Germany, and we'll get that here in a second. We're going to do the same sort of thing. We're going to roll with a -1 on the current German leadership table, which means we'll be rolling on the constitutional Kaiser table very likely, but let me double check that. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done step 4, which is apply reduce German leadership. So we are now down to a constitutional Kaiser, which also means that Germany is technically a democracy. That matters for things like shared troop convoys and things like that, um, and probably some other changes that we'll see if Germany stays democratic. So if you kind of look at the world like, oh, well, I don't know what happens if the United States is democratic and Germany is democratic. I assume they still have to fight. I don't know. I'm kind of wondering just how far do things break in this space, but we'll figure it out. Wouldn't that be interesting? Germany plus America versus everybody else. That'd be interesting, I guess, but I don't think that's feasible. What we are going to do though is we're going to roll with a -1 DRM on the constitutional Kaiser table. Now, um, we're certainly not going to get the sixth result, which would be the era of aggrandizement, where Germany readies for a rematch and we would get prepared Germany. That would be helpful. I'd be the opposite of being unprepared. Germany is prepared for war. Well, we're not going to get that because we're going to have a -1. The worst result, though, is a 1, which is a putsch, and we're going to roll a die, and Germany either becomes Nazi Germany anyway or becomes communist Germany, which I don't know what's going to happen when like a lot of Europe is communist and we all fight each other because they're different kinds of communism. They just got to fight each other. That could be what happens. Now there are other things in here. There's Germany just straight up becoming democratic. It could be that there's no result. Not sure. Um, I'm not sure what I would want the die roll to be. So this is where I like thumb on the scales. Well, what would I want the result to be? It would be nice to roll on the gains and losses table and maybe get something. That would be nice. I don't know. So we'll roll the die. We'll see what we get. I guess yeah. What we would want a 5 or a 6 ideally. Okay, so we got a 6. -1 is a 5. So Krupp and Juncker's influence preserves German strength and militarism. No result. So the Kaiser had to have some reforms. There's a clear constitution in the German Empire that is in alignment with the Kaiserreich narrative. So we're kind of on point there, and nothing else happened. We could have very nearly had seen some kind of overthrow that sees the Germans turning to Nazism anyway in this timeline, but the die roll came away clean, so we don't need to worry about that. But now we're going to have the rest of our steps. There's still a long way to go, guys. We got a lot. The world has to get in order here. So the next step, step 6, is that we're going to roll on the European popular movements table, and it doesn't appear that we're going to have any die roll modifiers, so let's take a look at what that involves. Here's where I may put my thumb on the scales just to see how interesting the world can get. So what could happen is that there is strikes and demonstrations across Britain, which would lead to either a communist Britain or a fascist Britain. Now, in the Kaiserreich narrative, Britain, at least the home islands of Great Britain, Canada kind of breaks off, Australia breaks off, but Britain itself becomes communist, or a form of communism anyway. The second result has to do with France, and uh, France becomes communist or fascist. Um, and then there's a role that affects Italy, which just could keep Italy communist or turn it fascist. We could deal with something in Spain, or we could see some gain or losses for Turkey, or some other Eastern Europe upheaval across this. Now, for the result that I want for Kaiserreich, I'm going to end up picking this one, guys. So bear with me. I'm going to say we roll a 1 and we get British, and we're going to get a communist Britain. Okay? So I'm putting my thumb on the scales. Communist Britain is going to happen. So a lot of Europe is turning communist or is divided in Eastern Europe. So let me go apply that, and then we'll start looking at the European Civil War table next, which I think I may decide the result for that as well, fortunately or unfortunately. So, yeah, let me take care of Communist Britain. There you see the Communist Britain marker in London, and we'll have a point here. There's a design note in the Dice of Decision book that says for this event assumes Harry Pullet, a general secretary of the Communist Party of Great Britain, succeeds in building a popular front coalition with the Labour Party and dominates the resulting coalition government. For this reason, our Communist Britain is a bit more moderate in its policies than, say, a Communist France. Communist Britain retains her colonies in close ties with the US. During play, treat all references to Chamberlain and Churchill as Poland, which is a little bit different than, I guess, well, it's similar and different from Kaiserreich. In Kaiserreich, the Communist Britain is a bit more moderate, I think, but it loses some of its colonies here. Okay, we'll roll with what we've got because we need to. The next step is our European Civil War table. Now, for this one, there are a number of results here. We can see bloodshed and troubles across Eastern Europe, which could lead to a Caucasian or Ukrainian civil war. Tensions divide the Young Turks. The Caliphate attempts to restore Ottoman rule, so there could be a Turkish civil war. Franco leads nationalist uprising against Republican Spain, so Spanish civil war, that would be maybe more of a conventional. Croats and Serbs renew old rivalries. If Austria is a neutral monarch country, which I think it is, we would have a civil war there, which would be interesting. And violence in the streets stops short of civil war, so we'd roll on the popular movement table, which this is the interesting one. So in the Kaiserreich narrative, France France becomes communist as well, but after a civil war. But the civil war is over by the time 1936, 1937 rolls around. So I thought about maybe putting France in a civil war, but that would almost make it even better for Germany, and I don't want to do that. So this is what we'll do. We are going to say that on our European Civil War table, we roll a 2. Violence in the streets stops short of civil war. And then when we roll, we get the Samard and Bucard vie for political control of France, stopping short of civil war. Britain scrambles to find friends. So we're going to go ahead and make France communist. And then the Western faction may apply British diplomacy. So we're going to give Britain some diplomacy, but we're going to apply communist France. So let me take care of that. And when that is complete, we will be further enough along that we're going to roll twice on the European powder keg table. So Europe is in turmoil and lots to occur here. Okay, so what we see here, France is communist. I don't know, the French Commune, Paris Commune is back. And then with the British diplomacy, they chose the northern chart. I was thinking maybe we'd get Denmark, Norway, or Sweden or something. Those would be helpful. But we got the Baltic states, which now has Western influence. I don't know. You could say maybe these Baltic states are considering adopting some form of a moderate socialism kind of thing, clearly distinct from the Soviet Russia
flavor, which is why it's not Soviet influence. I don't know. You can interpret that how you will, but that's what we got. So now we're going to roll on the powder keg table. We're going to do it so twice. Um, and basically what can happen is, based on what we roll, we're going to get a area table, and then we're going to roll on that, and get a diplomatic incident, which can lead to all kinds of craziness. So we'll just roll this out and see what happens. Um, all right, so we rolled a 2. Gambles in Galicia. Um, and I think I'm supposed to be using the dice of decision area tables. So there is a separate player aid card for this. So I think we're doing central. You can see it's different. It knows that Austria-Hungary might be around, so it's in the central table. We'll roll, and we got a 1. So set back, no result. Okay, much ado about nothing. Oh well. Okay, so we're gonna do that again. I'm like shuffling player aids here. All right, rolling again for the area. We rolled a 1, so troubles in Transylvania. Some damn fool thing in the Balkans, evidently. Um, Balkans, okay. We get Bulgaria. Okay. Oh, this is going to be interesting. Okay. So in Bulgaria, the Axis is going to roll on the diplomatic incident. And a 1 or a 6 is a no result. A roll on the guarantee table doesn't occur, but we'll roll it. And we rolled a 1. Roll on the guarantee table. Let me double check. No result. Okay. Well, that's maybe a little not exciting. So the powder kegs didn't go off. So as chaotic as the social movements, international balance is not sparking up. I would have thought maybe something was going to happen there, but it didn't. That's okay. I'm okay. There's enough craziness going on this map. I think that's okay. So now we're on step 9 of our general insurrection, which is roll with a -1 DRM on the Western preparation table. So this could be interesting. Let me get the right table out. So Western preparation. So what are the potential results for this? Well, the worst result, I guess, for the Western player is that Western leaders continue in denial over cataclysm to come. So a proxy faction is going to apply unprepared Britain, unprepared France, or unprepared Italy, um, which, I'm not sure who's the proxy faction at this point. I'm not keeping track. I'll probably have to roll for it. But an unprepared Britain or France would obviously tip the game even further. Though what's funny now is we've got communists, and communists way out in the east. So I don't know. Germany is the sole bastion of democracy in form of a constitutional monarchy in Europe. That's funny. Um, the other side of it is the West is ready for the fight, with the Western faction applying prepared Britain, prepared France, or prepared Italy, um, and may also apply uh, Anglo-Portuguese alliance. Now, for this one, I think I'm just going to roll it. There's no the -1 die roll modifier means we're more likely to get unprepared. We're not going to be able to get prepared. The best result the Western powers can hope for is that Western, I guess there's a mix of things here, but a 5 would be Western intelligence networks are alert to the threat, so we'd get some British intelligence, some other alliances. There are some results that would make, I don't know. So we're just going to roll die and get a -1, see what happens. So we rolled a 5, -1 is a 4. So complacency is rampant. Yeah, all this revolution and socialism, communism getting sprung up. I mean, everybody's too busy worrying about their internal politics right now than worrying about a second world war. So foreign agents infiltrate important posts. The Axis faction may apply unprepared Britain, unprepared France, or unprepared Italy, If it does so, Soviet faction may apply either Comintern committees or Russian intelligence. So I think that Soviet choice, and it may apply. So we can choose not to do this, but I think the Axis is going to want to. If it does so, the Soviet faction may apply either Comintern committees or Russian intelligence. I'm going to have to look at that as the Soviets and decide what's better. Comintern committees, I'm sure, will probably be something like diplomatic influence, and Russian intelligence would maybe do something else. So I'll have to think about that. I'll have to look both of those up and decide. But now the Axis is going to apply unprepared France or unprepared Britain, and keep in mind Russia is already unprepared. so, so I think the best thing that the Germans could hope for is an unprepared France. So I think we're going to do that, and then we'll see about the Russian option. So let me take care of that, and when we finish all that stuff up, we're going to get to the U.S. election table, which may prove interesting. So stand by. Okay, so unprepared France is going to really lead to France's goose being cooked, but we'll see what happens. And the Russians chose the Comintern committees, which adds a partisan base to their outbreak of war conditional events. So this just kind of helps that, given that Russia's already unprepared, if the Germans are making headway there, let's say they are fighting in Russia, we can use the partisan base. We can get that deployed and just make it really hard to take Russia down. So we're building some resiliency despite being unprepared as Russia. That was kind of the best choice I feel I could make. The intelligence option would have enabled an extra Fortunes of War card for Russia, which that could be really powerful, but I'm choosing not to use that at the moment. Okay, so what's next? Well, we have the U.S. election table, 220. Now, there is a -1 on this. So what does that mean? Well, the sixth result that we will not be able to get is Hoover defies political convention and wins a third term in 1936. This would lead to a vetoing of Lend-Lease and an unprepared U.S. That's kind of the worst possible result, I guess, for the U.S. Unprepared would lead to a delay of their Far Eastern forces, so that would give greater play for the Japanese in the Daisenso map, and then Lend-Lease would just be basically no Lend-Lease for the Western Allies whatsoever, the communist Western Allies. So there's that. The result that gives us a greater chance of happening is Long challenges Roosevelt for the 1936 election, unleashing a sea of change in U.S. politics, and roll one die. We either get communist U.S. or a fascist U.S. Now, for this one, and there's a lot of other in between results that could lead to the vetoing of Lend-Lease, could lead to unprepared U.S. And different things here. But that basically 1 in 3 chance of having a communist or fascist U.S. is disturbing. But I feel like I'm going to roll the die for this one. I just want to see what are we going to get. Who knows? Um, Having a communist or fascist U.S. probably doesn't change a whole lot, but we'll see. And we rolled a 2 -1 means we have a regime change in the United States. Whoa, okay, all right. So now we're going to roll another die. 1 through 3, it's a communist U.S. 4 through 6, it's a fascist U.S. I'm not sure what it matters right now, but we'll see what we get. We rolled a 2. That's a communist U.S. The whole world is going communist, but Germany. My gosh. Okay, I got to go look at what this is going to change. I'm sure it's going to change quite a lot. But basically, all the factions on the map that are not Axis are communist. So it's basically Germany and maybe what will be the remnant of the Central Powers against a coalition of communist states. That's pretty scary to think about, right? A lot of just everybody is communist, and you got to fight everybody. That's maybe the way this is going to go. So I will go apply communist U.S. After that, we're going to go to the Emperor Showa table. So at last, we've been very Totalitarian focused the last long while. We're going to return to Daisenso and see what happens with Emperor Showa. But we will go take care of this communist US result. Okay, for now, the US being communist is me just putting a marker in one of the US boxes, but there is some design note text to go with this. This event assumes Huey Long survives the attempt on his life in 1935 and goes on to lead a populist revolt in the United States with support from Norman Thomas and other socialists. During play, treat all references to Roosevelt as Long. So Huey Long is in the White House. Now, the important thing to point out here, folks are going to look at this playthrough and they're going to be shocked that the United States can change ideology like this. Now, game wise, that won't change a whole lot, especially because they're going to share the same ideology as the rest of the Western allies. So I don't know, they're all socialist, whatever. There's going to be effects to that. Now, you might be sitting here thinking, this is preposterous. Dice of Decision gets too crazy. How could this be? Well, keep in mind the die rolls probably are not going to give you this result. I have intentionally pushed the world into a very unstable state. It is more likely that your chapter 2 scenario is going to be more like agitation or stability or something along those lines. And you're simply not even going to get a die roll presented to you where the US is going to flip. Many of the results in the chapter 2 outcome scenario uh, don't even have a U.S. election table. So there are some in erratic electorates, uh, but in agitation there is not. And again, depending on what your die roll is, most of the time it's not going to lead to this crazy bit of a regime change, so to speak. So please don't think that just because this is the way my game is going, that this result of a communist USA is likely. It's in fact very unlikely. And I have helped to influence the die rolls to get here, and my die roll did just happen to make it so. But please do not think that this is going to be a common occurrence. I don't think this is going to come up very often. Anyway, so the US is in place. And for the Kaiserreich narrative, what the mod does, interestingly, is that there is a second US Civil War in that mod for Hearts of Iron, and the US splits into multiple factions and they fight it out, and somebody presumably becomes the new controlling faction of the United States. And it may mean that, yes, the United States may become fascist or communist or some other thing, or it stays divided. Obviously this game can't really do all of that, and it wasn't intended to. I think this is a just fine result. We'll say, okay, yeah, there's been enough change. Gosh, everybody else is communist, so why not the US in this case? Anyway, now we're going to go to the Emperor Showa table. And this is going to be a -1 as well for this. So the Emperor Showa table, the result that we can't get at all is the 6 result that says the new emperor continues the reforms prompted by Taisho democracy. And that would lead to either a communist Japan or a constitutional emperor. But that option cannot happen with the -1 on our die roll. The result that we're going to get more likely of now, because of it being in a 1 or a 2, is the February 26th incident leaves Japan feeling uncertain. Roll 1 die, and we either get army leadership or naval leadership, which, all things considered, that's not a very drastic change, but everything in the middle is going to potentially lead to a different result. So I will just roll the die for this one with a -1. I did roll a 6. -1 is a 5. So the new emperor takes an active role in international diplomacy. Roll on the Showa diplomacy table, which, okay, that's interesting. So this is another table. Um, this is going to lead to a variety of different events, basically just determining who is going to fall under whose sway. Now, our options could be we're going to get oil guarantees from the Netherlands East Indies, in which case we would get an alliance. That's actually a very interesting thought. Japan forms an alliance with Siam. That's not as interesting. Northern China falls under Japan's sway, and that leads to some army leadership and Japanese diplomacy application. Army leadership may occur, a treaty with Britain, or a treaty with Russia. So a lot of different things could happen right now. I'll just roll the die because I'm not sure I'm partial to anything, though the alliance with the Netherlands East Indies is really, really interesting. I'll let the dice decide. All right, so we got a 4. Factional infighting frustrates all diplomatic efforts. Oh well. Army leadership 43.1. So we'll take care of that. And then we're going to be rolling on the Chinese unification table next. Okay, so with the Emperor Showa table coming up, not particularly interesting for the Japanese, we continue the effects on the Daisenso part of the game with rolling on the Chinese unification table. Now, for this one, there can be some interesting results here. One extreme, the northern expedition fails against the warlords, and Sun Yat sen seeks closer ties with Russia to prop up the dream of a united China. Apply communist Jiangsu and neutral Kansu. Proxy faction will either apply pro-axis or extra forces to Hope, which is interesting. Now, the complete opposite side of that, and of course, you're going to get grades in between here, but a sixth. A sixth gives you Chang's great victory in the Central Plains War, advances the dream of a unified China. Proxy faction must apply either pro-West or extra forces to its choice of Hope or Szechuan. Hopa. Hope? I don't know. Now, looking over the results, I'm not particularly married to any particular result. So I'll just roll the die and we'll see what we get. So we got a 5. There was no die roll modifier for this. Chang suffers a setback in the Central Plains War to rival KMT cliques. Proxy faction must apply non-alignment to Hope or Szechuan. Well, who's going to be our proxy faction? Japan is. What would Japan prefer? Well, I'm going to have to double check what non-alignment is. I'm going to guess it means that like either Szechuan or Hope are just entirely neutral and are not part of any sort of Chinese alliance system. But I'm going to double check that, and we'll implement the result. And then the next table we'll be rolling on is the Japanese adventurism table, which will have more things related to what's going on with Japan. And then we're going to get to the Cyan incident table, and then we'll start looking at wrapping up the video here. So we're in the kind of tail end of things, guys. We're getting there. Okay, I actually had the neutrality apply to Szechuan with the thinking that, like, okay, Hope is nearest to where the Japanese are going to be operating. I think we'd rather fight our way through Hope knowing we're just going to have to, but then not have to worry about Szechuan. And then, I don't know. We'll figure things out from there. This could be a poor choice, but I mean, gosh, everything else has been going basically the Axis's way that I'm going to be okay with making a mistake here. And I don't know. I mean, if you're watching this and you have a thought, which would you rather make neutral, Szechuan or Hope? I think making Szechuan neutral is a choice, and I will live with that choice, whatever it is. So next, we have the Cyan incident, and we are gonna. Oh, I'm sorry. No, the Japanese adventurism table. Gosh, with a -1. So what does that do? Well, the result that we can't get now is the Mukden incident fails to ignite. And that would be applying free Manchukuo and Hope Jehol, and then we'd have another -1 on the Cyan incident table. We can't get that result at all. The result that we're going to get more likely now, which is on the 1 result, is the IJA goes to the very gates of Paiping, apply Japanese Tianjin and Japanese Qingtao, apply a +1 DRM to the subsequent roll on the Cyan incident table. And a +1, well, that does make China potentially stronger internally. So there's a kind of a, it's almost going to be a wash. Whatever sort of benefits we get, there'll be sort of a reaction to that, which is appropriate. I think that's right of it. So we will roll, and again, we have a -1. So let's see what we get. I rolled a 2, -1 is a 1. So indeed, the IJA goes to the very gates of Piping. We will apply Japanese Tianjin and Japanese, excuse me, Tsingtao. And then we'll get that +1 on the cyan incident table, which that's going to twist things a bit here. So let me go take care of those results. So this is going to be all up here one way or another. We'll talk about the results, the effects of these events that I have to implement here.
Now, it's almost impossible to see, or probably is impossible to see at this scale of where the camera is, but I did put another overlapping map picture here on the Daisenso map. What's a little frustrating is that um, the two map overlays are kind of overlapping, so it was tough to get it just right and then get my plexiglass put all the way back on and all the counters just right. So what does that even do? Well, one, and this is kind of the weird thing. Well, Qingtao was German controlled, but if I apply these things just correctly, it seems to imply that doesn't matter, and that transfers control to Japan. Now, this could be errata, that if Germany controls Tsingtao, like you wouldn't hand this over to the Japanese. But given that all the Pacific holdings are likely to be given over to Japan anyway from the Germans, I just said, okay, fine. And I flipped the ceded lands marker that exists there to the Japanese side. So there you go. Then we also got the CN10. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. All that really did is that it gives basically the Japanese an extra hex next to Pai Ping at the very start. So you could argue this makes it even easier to get into the strategic hex of Pai Ping because the Japanese now own another hex and they can set up in there, they can get situated there and attack from there straight away. So we sort of effectively weakening the northern Chinese defenses, so to speak. But again, we are going to have a +1 now to the cyan incident table. Cyan. So we've got our +1. And what are the results on this table, which is effectively the last table we're going to be rolling on for Dice of Decision before we start looking at the final setup. And boy, that's going to be interesting to see where we get with that. Anyway, so the result that we can no longer get is Chang and Mao would rather fight each other, and we would apply communist acceptance, which would change our policy affected countries' policies. But given that the Japanese have made such great advances against Pai Ping, that is being the effect of that is more likely that the communists and the nationalists are going to cooperate. So the result that is more likely is we're going to get that nationalist resistance. So we'll roll the die here with a +1, see what we get. All right. So I rolled a 5, +1 is a 6. So we did get indeed nationalist resistance. So when I go to check that, 2614, 2614, where is it? Okay. So this is nationalist resistance, change nationalist China's policy to resistance. Well, what is it now? Acceptance. Okay. So we're going to change that to resistance. And I'll have to find the counter for that. I'm going to have to go dig around in some baggies for it. Now, what that will mean is once nationalist China's policy is resistance, that puts it in the same bucket as communist China. So now there is no way for us as the Japanese to be fighting perhaps just the nationalists and holding off on the communists. Now, if we go to war and the resistance policy is removed, both the Chinese and the nationalists will be fighting Japan. So this is sort of the, I guess, negative effect for Japan. Now we've got a more united China to deal with despite our gains. So there's a little bit of a push and pull here. Things are going to be a little bit different, a little bit more contentious to deal with in that part of the campaign, which is good. You want things to be just a little bit different, a little bit trickier. Um, so let me get a little more organized. Let me get that counter set up, and then let's look to wrap up the video. So we're effectively done doing the chapter 2 stuff. I do have one go back. I realized I made a mistake. While I had thought initially that communist France just meant sticking a communist France marker on and knowing that they were going to be a minor country aligned with the West, well, that turns out not to be the case. I skipped a step. I should have read a bit better, and I did, thanks to a reminder in Dice of Decision Rule 1.4 that talks about, okay, well, now you're ready to start doing the final setup. But keep in mind that some things may have changed, like if Communist France occurred. And sure enough, as opposed to Britain becoming communist or the Americans, where at least at the beginning the immediate actions are tame, France is actually quite a bit different. And it basically shatters France as a overall power. So we have the French flag now in Paris, not just the communist marker, which is denoting France as a neutral minor country. That's right, it's not even aligned with Great Britain any longer. And their communist France marker actually replaces their policy affected country marker, which means I guess they're not actually in appeasement with Britain. I'm looking at this situation going, I'm not sure anyone would ever want to play this campaign because it is so gosh darn kooky, and I think the Axis powers are going to have a decisive advantage for a while because of it. But so it goes. It's just the way it's going to have to be. So besides that, we see the finishing of North Africa becoming independent because when Communist France occurs, Morocco and Algeria finish becoming independent. And if Tunisia wasn't already, they would become so. And we also see Indochina over on the Dicenso map becoming independent. And any other places that would have mattered would become so as well. And so this is really kind of shifting the overall weight of the game even more so, though France gets a plus influence for the Soviets. Um, so, really, as we look across the map, we see kind of a very strange tapestry right now. So, the next video that we do here is going to be focused on talking about the final setup. There are a lot of things as I've gone through the Dice of Decision module that basically go, hey, do this right now, and there are mnemonics involved, right? Place this marker, that marker will matter later, so on and so forth, all these things. To be self-referential later, because every one of these sort of special rules that are in the module book that you have to go read will say, okay, well then during play, this is supposed to happen. I am really afraid I'm going to miss something, so I'm going to have to be super careful stepping through the setup to make sure we get things right, because we have to keep in mind that the setups may change. For neutral miners, it's not so bad, because if we say, hey, um, Ireland needs to set up, well, we know Ireland got Northern Ireland. We can double check that in the book. We can see if Ireland gets an extra unit, and they just might. And that's usually what this equates to. You have gained territory, that ceded land marker usually means you're going to get some extra units. That's not hard to remember, but like the way that communist France is going to work, we're going to have to reference very carefully as we play this campaign. Super carefully, in fact. I'm going to have to go slower than I've ever gone to make sure I don't screw up. And that because of these different events, like the German Pacific Empire, I'm going to have to reread sections and understand and make sure I know when a card gets played or an event occurs or something happens, that we are accounting for the Dice of Decision changes that have occurred. We're functionally adding new bits of rules that we're going to have to go back and find again and reference and make sure that we get right. So something I'm accepting the pain for all the craziness that I've set up in this world for this given campaign. It's just something we're going to have to deal with. No getting around it, I guess. But besides that, right, we can get this set up. We can do the Schiffskrieg setup. We may not have to set up a whole lot more because, like any 1937 campaign, there's not a lot to set up. We'll certainly want to set up various things, but I'll have to be diligent there too. We'll cover all of that in the next video, so I want to wrap up this chapter 2 video by reflecting on what the world really looks like right now. How have things progressed? We have exited World War One, and the intervening years after the peace treaties were signed have been one of incredible volatility in the world from multiple angles. So much so that we're seeing the rise of new nations, we're seeing dramatic socio-political changes in major powers, and even really the collapse of some of these powers out there in the world. North Africa is totally independent, a set of neutral miners, sort of a decolonialism, early decolonizing occurring, so to speak. Morocco is independent. Algiers, Tunisia is independent. Libya is independent. Egypt remains under a dominion, but it is under the dominion of the Ottoman Empire, which it was once a part of in the past. And the Ottoman Empire still retains control of a big chunk of the Middle East. In the Balkans and near Greece, we see a smattering of minor countries: Greece, Bulgaria, Romania. But we also have a state of Austria Hungary that has managed to weather the tests of time, but is a wholly neutral faction at the moment, and exists purely in the sense of being neighborly to the Germans. But there's no requirement that Austria Hungary has any particular diplomatic leanings, which I think is interesting, at least for the time being. Italy has fallen to the craze of revolution and is now a communist state on the border there, with some influence with the primary communist state of Russia, and we'll get to that in a second. And even out in the west here, Portugal remains, but Spain is fractured, not in civil war, but with Basque breaking off, so to speak, as a minor state, and whatever turmoil may come with that. Switzerland sits happily neutral, but just across the border, we see that France is really disintegrated also into a communist revolution aligned with Soviet communism as opposed to the more moderate socialism of Britain, and functionally unprepared. So, should France enter the Great Second War, whatever the case may be, it's potentially unprepared. I'll have to double check if the unprepared state still applies here, but basically, France is ripe for any sort of picking or some righteous sort of monarchy, coming in to take over. Who knows? Also leaves Belgium, Holland without a continental protector, critically. Now, Britain is a moderate socialist state. It's managed to retain its member dominions, um, so a very soft version of things, soft landing. But a cost to that has been giving up Northern Ireland to the state of Ireland. So something that they've had to kind of just accept. In Eastern Europe, there continues to be a smattering of independent states, as well as Northern Europe, or we'd say Scandinavia, Denmark, Norway, independent, Sweden, independent, Finland, independent. The Baltic states, amusingly, attempting to be some moderate force in the chaos of the period and is most aligned with Britain's version of socialism, which probably extends to the United States version of socialism and communism that the United States has adopted, which is quite amusing in some respect. Poland, independent. Belarusia, independent. Ukraine, independent. The Caucasus, independent. And we have seen truly the cracked state of Russia, the horrors of the Russian Civil War, leaving a core rump Russian state that's still trying to export the ideas of communism, but they stand woefully unprepared for future conflicts. That extends even into the Pacific region, where we have seen a variety of changes. So, Germany retains a Pacific empire holding areas of New Guinea, several different island chain areas that they may be looking to sell, with the doubt that they'd be able to keep those possessions surrounded by communism at this point. Uh, France has let go of Indochina. The Dutch East Indies stand relatively the same. Siam, the same. Tibet, But China is in a weird state. Szechuan is firmly neutral, wanting to stay out of any engagements. But the nationalists of Jiangsu and the Kansu communists have come to some accord because of the Japanese progress near Paiping out in Hopei that convinced by the progress made by the Japanese, a united front is more solidified and they are prepared to face repercussions of that as it evolves. But elsewhere, connecting off of the Russian situation, Kazakhstan is independent, Siberia is independent, the Far East Republic is independent. All of these states kind of breaking off from the USSR, or the well, maybe it's just the Socialist Republic of Russia at this point. Um, Leaving behind again a very weakened rump state of central Russia. We could have seen Siberia become Greater Siberia, but that didn't come to pass. So there's still a little bit of a rump state of Russia on the Daisenso map, but that's it. And that's our world going into this next campaign playthrough. A very different world, one in which you could say it is a grand crusade either for or against communism. The only powers on the board that are not some version of socialism is the democratic monarchy, the constitutional monarchy, democracy of Germany, and the totalitarian government of Japan, or at least I suppose it might qualify as totalitarian. I might have to double check a couple of these things. Let's see, ideology. Totalitarian, yeah. So, okay. So, a combination of a democratic Germany in the form of constitutional Kaiser and a totalitarian Japan standing against the red hordes of pretty much everybody else and all the minor states stuck in between the Great Crusade. I don't know what you want to call this. This is the great, I don't know, the great red crusade, perhaps. If it's the Allies, the Comintern versus the stable totalitarian states, the remnant states. I don't know what you want to look at it, but it's going to make for something interesting, and we'll see just how well any of these particular powers can do in such a changed world. And we could have wound up with very different results. We look at all of this. We could have wound up with a United States unwilling to commit lend-lease, one that would be totally and woefully unprepared. We could have seen a totalitarian Britain. We could have seen any number of things, my thumb on the scale notwithstanding. We've seen a lot of chaotic stuff go on. I think this will make for a really different World War II playthrough. One I'm really interested to see how it plays out, even if it ends up turning out to indeed be one-sided for the Axis. I do kind of enjoy seeing the way that the world is kind of broken out and just what this is going to mean tactically on the table, as various powers are either incapable of addressing or contesting the enemy, um, or perhaps other restrictions that I can't even foresee yet could come to pass here. As Germany, I think, is going to want to put the band together again, reform the Central Powers, and then fight the hordes of communism. What a campaign! We'll see what happens. So in the next video, we will look to finish setup, and based on that setup, based on everything else that we will have put together, we'll probably spend a good chunk of next video talking about general grand strategy based on what we know with the cards that are being changed in the decks and what the strategic scores are for everybody, and just what is the lay of the land, how do we expect this to go. So we'll see you in the next one, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Chapter 2 complete for Dice of Decision. We're going to finalize things and get rolling in the campaign from 1937 on. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I'm not sure what to make of all this Dice of Decision stuff, but if you're experimenting with it or you're learning and you want to share thoughts, I would really appreciate it. I'm kind of heading off into uncharted territory here, but we'll make something of it as best we can. So thanks for watching again. Take care. Keep gaming. We'll see you in the next one.